Haunted Appalachia Part 1. So this is a new series I'm starting where I'm going to talk about Appalachian houses that are haunted, and more specifically in Pikeville, Kentucky, we have a lot of historic houses that are haunted. However, their stories are not commonly told. We have the historic Pikeville Mansion, which sits beside the parking garage. It is blue. We had the Creekmore Manor, but the University of Pikeville bought it and demolished it to make a parking lot. And then we have the York House. The York House is the one that specifically we're going to be talking about today. This is an original picture of the York House, and it's important that I show an original and a current, and you will see why. This house has direct connection to the Hatfield-McCoy feud. I will briefly mention that, but I'm not going to go into the whole Hatfield-McCoy feud thing today. That's too much. So this house was built in 1882 by Colonel John Dills, who was one of the biggest known names in Pikeville, Kentucky. It was built during the Hatfield-McCoy feud, and it sits beside the old home place of Perry Klein, who was a big part of the Hatfield-McCoy feud story because he was a lawyer with direct ties to both sides of the family. Property specifically sat about 1 mile from John Dills' home, and in 1876, I believe, he deeded it to his oldest daughter, Augusta York, who had married James York, who was a prominent attorney in Pikeville. Augusta designed and began construction on the house. Now, when the home was constructed, it was specifically constructed to have the tower that was on the left side of the house, which I will show again in this photo. This tower right here, right there, is the one specifically we're going to speak of today. So after the home was built and after the family lived there, it then went through a course of many other owners throughout the years before in 2017 the house was actually bought and restored by the town of Pikeville, Kentucky. The house now is a boutique that is still owned by the town of Kentucky and just leased out. This is a current photo, and as you can see, the tower is no longer there. See, in this home used to be a little girl named Geraldine, and Geraldine had severe mental delays and mental disabilities. It's unknown if it was caused by a high fever or if she was simply born that way. However, mental delays and disabilities in the 1800s and even the early 1900s were heavily feared, they were not understood, and they were embarrassing. This commonly led to the creation of silence rooms or disappointment rooms, which is basically where if you had a delayed child or an unruly child, you would designate one part of the house that was kind of off to itself, and that would become that child's room. This tower became Geraldine's disappointment room. It's often said that she would sit in the window and she would cry and scream and bang on the windows. This resulted in that specific area of this house being a paranormal hotbed for the years to come. It's often said that UPike students who were walking that road to go to the movie theater or to go to the gas station or to do whatever they were doing would commonly hear little girls screaming and a banging noise, and I believe they even called it the cries from the girl in the house. It became a very common story amongst the locals. However, when the house was being built and restored, the story as to why the tower is no longer there is that the tower was taken off of the house and put at a secondary location to be restored. That way it could be put back onto the house in better condition. But when it was removed, it was supposed to be put in an outbuilding that was outside to house it until they were ready to actually take it to be restored. Once the house was ready for that specific part, they went into the building where it was supposed to be stored, and it was no longer there. They lost the entire tower to this house. Nobody knows where it went. And rather than rebuilding an entire tower, they just instead finished the house without the tower, and that's how it stands in its current state today. To me, without the tower, the house does look disproportionate, and this has become a paranormal legend in Kentucky. Apparently this house has heavy paranormal activity. You are not allowed to ghost hunt in the house. However, people have gotten permission to do so, and I have seen some of the footage, but they're not allowed to release it to the public. And if you Google the York House in Pikeville, Kentucky, pretty much all that's going to come up is that it has connections to the Hatfield-McCoy feud. You're not going to find a whole lot of the ghost stories. And that's the same thing for a lot of our historic houses in Pikeville. Charco's Restaurant was a Hatfield-McCoy house. We have a lot of these historic houses, and almost every single one of them has this extensive lore that you can't ever find anything on unless you ask the locals. And that makes me sad, because if I was researching a town, as cool as the Hatfield-McCoy feud stories are, I want to know the real stories of the people who lived in those houses and what happened in those houses. So that's what I'm here for.